And we get a glimpse of that through the likes of the Hastings article. I really call on journalists, young journalists, to be inspired, if you like, by this Rolling Stones article, not to be put off by the apologists, not to be put off by those who served their country embedded in the Green Zone in Baghdad, but to see journalism as something that is truth-telling and represents people and does serve one's country.
It's interesting you say this, as up in Toronto, we just came from Toronto yesterday, well, hundreds of people and a number of journalists have been beaten and arrested as they try to cover what's happening on the streets, the protests around the G8, G20 meetings, as they talk about protecting banks and promoting war in the summits. Yeah.
Well, there is a war on journalism. There's long been a war on journalism. Journalism has always been, I mean, if you read, let's say, General Petraeus's counterinsurgency manual, which he put his name to in 2006, he makes it very clear. He said, we're fighting wars of perception, and I paraphrase him, in which the news media is a major component. So unless the news media is part of those wars of perception, that is, that not so much the enemy that is our objective, it's the people at home, then, you know, they're out. They're part of, they can easily become part of the enemy. And as we've seen in the numbers of journalists who have been killed in Iraq, more journalists have been killed in Iraq, mostly Iraqi journalists, than in any other war in the modern era. There's a war on this kind of truth-telling, and we're seeing this another form of this attack on truth-telling by the likes of Fox and CBS and New York Times this morning. It embarrasses them. What Hastings has done deeply embarrasses these apologists.
Well, interestingly, it was Hastings himself that exposed the mainstream media. Just quoting from Greenwald, it's Long to Come. As Barrett Brown notes in Vanity Fair, Hastings in 2008 did to the establishment media what he did to General McChrystal. He exposed what they do and how they think by writing the truth after he quit Newsweek, where he was the Baghdad correspondent, and wrote a damning expose about how the media distorts war coverage. As Brown put it, Hastings ensured that he would never be trusted by the establishment media ever again.
What a wonderful accolade. My goodness, that's a tremendous honor for him to be.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you about the coverage of the Gaza aid flotilla that was attacked by the Israeli commandos. You've come in from Britain to the United States to do this piece on the media. Your assessment of the media's coverage?
Well, it's very different. I mean, there was, I think I think the perception of Israel and Palestine has changed quite significantly in Europe. And there was horror at the murder of these people on the Turkish ship. And there was quick understanding, I felt, that how the Israelis manipulated the footage in order to suggest that the victims were actually assaulting those who attacked the flotilla. The coverage here has been bathed in the usual euphemisms about Israel. It's always put into the passive voice. Israel really, the Israeli commandos never really killed anybody. It was a tragic event in which people died, and so on and so forth. Having said that, I must say, Amy, since I've been in the United States, I see there's a shift that is in both politically, but certainly in the media. Since Lebanon, since Israel's attack on Lebanon in 2006, since the attack on Gaza, Christmas 2008 and early 2009, and now this assault on the flotilla, Israel can't be covered up. It can't be apologized for as effectively anymore. And even in the New York Times, which has always been a stalwart in supporting the Israeli regime, the language is changing. And I think this again reflects a popular understanding and a popular disenchantment with the Middle East and the United States' role in the Middle East, the apologies for one atrocity after the other, the lack of justice for the people in Palestine. So I don't know whether I'm being optimistic or not, but there is a change, and where that change is going to, I don't know.
Are there any other key stories that you feel the media is missing or distorting?
Well, I mean, one of the key stories is the devastation, the economic devastation in people's lives. That it seems to me extraordinary, and this is true in Britain as it is in the United States, that ordinary people have suffered since the collapse in September 2008 of significant parts of Wall Street, since the bubble burst, the idea that a president was elected as a man of the people, at least that's the way he presented himself, is still, I think, promoted by the media, whereas Obama has made clear that he's very much reinforced Wall Street. He has helped to rebuild Wall Street. His whole team is from Wall Street. He's reached into Goldman Sachs for his senior people. I think that anger that I've felt in the United States over the last few years, that anger at a popular level, is still not expressed in the so-called mainstream media. I remember in the last year of George W. Bush, someone had said that in one day 26,000 emails bombarded the White House, and almost all of them were hostile. That suggests to me a popular anger in this country that is often deflected into into cul-de-sacs like the Tea Party movement. But the root of that anger, and that is a social injustice in people's lives, in the repossession of houses, the loss of jobs, a rather weak reform, if it is a reform, of the scandalous healthcare arrangements. None of these, this popular disenchantment, disaffection, is not expressed in the media.
John Pilger,